Hi everyone, welcome back to Visually Hidden Selects. I'm Peter O'Brien, and today I would like to talk to you about John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978, directed by John Carpenter and starring Donald Pleasence, Nancy Loomis, PJ Soles, and Jamie Lee Curtis in her first feature film role. This was John Carpenter's third feature film as a director, following his semi-pro debut with Dark Star in 1974 and Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976. It was actually Assault on Precinct 13 that enabled Halloween to come into fruition. He had met Deborah Hill, who was his script supervisor on Assault on Precinct 13. She is the producer and co-writer of Halloween along with John Carpenter. They were approached by a producer named Irwin Yablans, who had wanted to make a kind of babysitter horror themed movie, and so John Carpenter and Deborah Hill worked on the script together. She primarily wrote the babysitter sequences while he worked on the themes of evil and all of the Dr. Loomis material. They wound up with a story that spanned a number of days and situations, and they decided to simplify it for the sake of the budget, set it all on one night, and that night would have to be Halloween, which is, of course, the scariest night of the year. This film was really kind of the prototype for what became the modern-day slasher film that was duplicated and replicated throughout the 1980s and even kind of revitalized in the 1990s with the Scream franchise. This, of course, was a huge influence on that particular film and series, but this is really the original. Everything else is a carbon copy when compared to Halloween because it set the standard for the genre, and it basically gave all aspiring filmmakers a blueprint to follow. The basic premise for the film is 15 years after murdering his sister, Michael Myers escapes from the mental hospital and returns home to relive the events, all the while being pursued by his doctor, Sam Loomis, played by Donald Pleasence. One of the things that I love about Halloween is that it is exceptionally effective and efficient filmmaking. This film was shot in 20 days on a budget of $300,000, and they were able to get an additional $20,000 out of the financer to hire Donald Pleasence, who only worked on the film for 5 days. And he only appears in 15 scenes. 4 of them are in the daytime, all the rest are at night, and a lot of them are one setup. There's really minimal work on their parts, and that's where the efficiency and the effectiveness comes into play. And when you watch it and you think about it being a low-budget film, it doesn't add up because it looks so good. Approximately half of the budget went to hiring the equipment to film the movie. They shot it with the Panaglide camera system, which was basically the Panaglide version of a Steadicam, which allowed the camera to move freely and smoothly without having to be tied down to a dolly. So there were a lot less setups required, which again allowed them to film this in just 20 days. And while Halloween builds on its contemporaries, such as Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it differs greatly because at its core, this film is really an homage to Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho. Not only because they share a genetic lineage in that Janet Leigh is the star of Psycho and her daughter Jamie Lee Curtis is the star of Halloween, but even the character of Dr. Sam Loomis is named after Sam Loomis from Psycho. So you can see that Carpenter had this in mind while he was crafting the story and creating the mythology of Michael Myers. One of the things that makes Halloween universally captivating, it takes the horror out of these extraordinary places or these exotic locations or these isolated locations, and it brings it right into your neighborhood, right down to the haunted house. The film has this reputation as being this icon of horror, but really, it's not a very gory film. A lot of the horror deals with the story and the tension, the creative camera work, of course, the performances by the leads, a lot of jump scares, and of course, the music. John Carpenter composed the score for this in just 3 days, and really, it makes the film. Right from the very beginning, the music kicks in over the opening credits, and it's in 5/4 time, which is just a little bit off kilter. You can't really tap your foot to it necessarily because it has this different meter than most music, so automatically your mind is working a little bit harder to process this theme. And then underneath it, he has these diabolic chords that just fill in the tone of the character of Michael Myers. So the music really complements the story and brings it to another level, as most good compositions do. But I think what really puts Halloween over the top is the on-screen talent. Donald Pleasence was a very accomplished actor, both on stage and on screen. He was a Bond villain, he was in The Great Escape, he had a very long and illustrious career, and Halloween came along and he really didn't want to do it because it was a low-budget film with a director he had never heard of. But his daughter had seen Assault on Precinct 13 and she really liked the music. So Donald Pleasence took the job on the recommendation from his daughter. And although Donald Pleasence gets top billing being the star, Jamie Lee Curtis really does an exceptional job in this film, especially for being her first feature role. She is just the most grounded and the most universally relatable character because she is the one with her eyes open. And so that is why she's really the only one who is aware of Michael Myers and aware that something is kind of not right in the neighborhood. PJ Soles is basically the comic relief of this film, and not only the comic relief, but also partially the sex appeal as well, given the nature of her character. And Nancy Loomis she also adds a little bit of sarcastic humor to the film, especially in her interactions with Laurie. Even though they were not teenagers at the time, they really kind of embody that outlook towards life in that they're just focused on the moment and they're focused on their interests at the moment. But as a filmmaker, I really love watching John Carpenter's earlier films because of how effective and efficiently they are filmed. The setups in this film are very minimal, but they are very effective. You could learn a lot about filmmaking simply by watching this movie and just making little notes on the length of a shot, the composition of a shot, and then how they're all cut together. And really, a big part of the magic in this film is the simplicity. It is not a complicated story, the characters are not incredibly complicated, and even the execution and presentation of it is not complicated. It's only when they try to complicate it that it falls apart and fails. And you can see this in the Rob Zombie remake from 2007, and even the David Gordon Green trilogy of recent years. When they overcomplicate it, it just falls apart. And so Halloween really does stand alone as just an exceptional horror film and a credit to the genre. And the cinematography is just beautiful. I cannot say that enough. Dean Cundey is just fantastic, and this is really some of his earliest professional work. He, of course, went on to work with a lot of big-name directors like Robert Zemeckis. He shot the entire Back to the Future trilogy, as well as Roger Rabbit. He worked with Steven Spielberg on Hook and Jurassic Park. And really, it all comes back to John Carpenter and these early films. It really is like a comfort food film. There's a big sense of nostalgia tied to this particular film, especially for people in my generation, simply because it was always there and it was always available. And even in the mid-90s, Blockbuster Home Video was distributing it. So if you went to rent anything, you went home with a copy of Halloween because it was only $7.99. I mean, who's gonna walk away from that? Really. It's true. I think the other thing that just heightens the profile of this film are the sequels, which are not as good, which make you appreciate this film even more every time you watch it. It's like after you get to part 8, you just feel so tainted and dirty and repulsed by what you saw, you don't even understand why you were watching it, so you go back to 1. and then you realize, oh yes, this is why I suffered through those other films, because this one is so strong and so poignant and so pure in what it's trying to do that everything else, it just gets a little bit more watered down every time. So that's it for Halloween. I really hope you like this recommendation, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future selections. If you do check out Halloween, please leave us a comment and let us know what you think. We will be discussing it at length on the Visually Hidden Selects podcast, so be sure to tune into that. And until next time, see ya!